Thank you all for being here this morning, this Sunday morning. I hope you guys got some good rest with the extra hour, a change in the time. This talk, I'm really indebted to nature for giving. I received this Dharma talk from being out in nature a couple of weeks ago, and I see it as part of a series of talks, actually. So one part of probably at least another or a third talk regarding lineage. And I want to thank, a couple of people. One is John Foote here for asking about who are the people in the lineage of our ancestors. Another point I want to make here is this year is the anniversary celebration of one of the founders of Soto Zen. His name was Keizan Jokin, and he wrote a book, a very creative, imaginative book about the Zen lineage called The Transmission of Light. And there's stories about teachers and their students that go from the Buddha all the way up to Zen Master Dogen in the 12th century. So about 1,200 years of student-teacher relationship and the mythology that goes with that. But there's also lineage that extends beyond Dogen into the present moment. And who are the people in that series of lineage? What are their stories? So I'd like to expound a little bit on that in this series of talks. But for this one in particular, I want to highlight the importance of lineage, not just for Zen Buddhism, but for humanity. So let me begin with what I received from nature a couple of weeks ago when I was sitting out on a trail not too far from where I live in Ames, Iowa. You know, we think that, let me say first that we think that we need to go somewhere in order to be in nature. But that's not true. We can be in nature in this very moment. All we need is to open our sense gates, our ears, our eyes, our nose. Open them up, and you can be in nature in this very moment. And one of the best things that we can do for nature today is simply be aware of it. Right? Just be aware of it. Even in our very homes, nature exists. Nature is there, if you're aware. So, as I was sitting on this trail, I noticed the leaves, many leaves falling down from the trees. Maybe you saw them over these past couple of weeks. And it was just quite a sight to behold, and I reflected for a moment that each one of those leaves one leaf is like a life. It's like a life of a human being. It's my life. It's your life. And if we could make an analogy, the detachment of the leaf from the tree is like our birth, where we enter the world. And we feel a sense of separation and the anxiety that comes with that separation. And then we kind of travel through the air on our way down to the earth. And that could be symbolic of our death. And in between that birth and death is our life. And compared to what's around it, it's very, very short, for one thing. That life of the leaf is so, if we were to say that it begins with a detachment from the tree and ends with the return to the earth, Our life is just that quick. And every leaf absolutely matters. Every single one of those leaves has the entire universe in it. Right? Lineage is seeing that the leaf is part of a tree. Right? That tree, maybe it was around for 50 years. Maybe it's been around for 100 years. Maybe it's been around for 500 years or even 1,000 years. And so one leaf and the amount of time it takes to get down from the tree branch to the earth, compared to the amount of time it took for the tree itself to get to that where it is, there's a vast difference there. You can count probably between 1 and 10 seconds the tree leaf falls to the earth. But the life of that tree might be 500,000, 2,000 years old. Think about the difference there. And when we can connect ourselves with the tree, with the lineage, what came before us, with the past, we won't have any of that anxiety that often results as thinking of ourselves as separate from the rest of the world, thinking of ourselves as isolated, separate individuals like little leaves. Just a leaf, right? Just a leaf. That leaf is connected to something that stems way, way back. And within that leaf is the energy of that tree that's been there for, in some cases, literally hundreds of years. All right. So this is an analogy to get us connected or thinking about the importance of lineage. And where does the leaf go? Right? It returns to the earth, and we see it decompose back into the soil. The tree then takes up the energy from that soil, which includes the matter of the leaf. In the leaf is all the 4 elements. You've got fire, you've got the sun in that leaf. The sun is absolutely in that leaf, right? Think about photosynthesis. It takes it absorbs the light from the sun before it's born, changes all kinds of beautiful colors, orange, red, yellow, purple, black spots, right? Changes all kinds of colors before it drops. It's like it's, doing its grand finale here. It has the rain, it has the water in it, right? Without the water, the tree couldn't be nourished. Of course, it's got the soil, the earth is in it. And the air, right? The air that gives space to it. All those 4 elements are found right in that leaf. And the same is true for us. We come from somewhere, right? We come from somewhere and we're going somewhere. This is, if we were to really connect with where we come from, we wouldn't have any kind of anxiety. I'm not saying that you will never have anxiety. I'm just saying that if we connect, and when we connect with where we come from, if we see ourselves as part of a much larger tree that's been around for hundreds of thousands of years, we won't worry. All right. So the question of where do we come from? Where do you come from? There's many ways to respond to that particular question. There's many ways to think about it and to respond to it. But one way to think about this really spiritual question, where do I come from? In the koan story is asked, the teacher asked the student, where do you come from? Right? That's a koan for us. And one way of thinking about this question of where we come from is to think about our lineage. Who are your ancestors? Who are your ancestors? when I asked that particular question, who are your ancestors? Where do your thoughts go? Where do your thoughts go, that question? Who are your ancestors? How many generations back can you go in your own blood lineage? For me, until recently, it was only about 3 or 4 generations back that I could go. I could go to my parents, my grandparents, and up until recently, my great-grandmother was the oldest living person that I knew in my blood lineage, and that was on my mother's side. So that was, that's 3 generations back. And I can think about some of the things that she had to deal with, and I know some of the stories behind how she came to the United States, for example, and what she did for a living, the fact that she spoke only Italian for her entire life. So she came at the age of 13 and died at the age of 98. She only could speak Italian, right? But I also know that she came from someplace deeper than that, and some of my spiritual roots come directly from her. I remember as a child, for example, I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and she would be ardently praying. And I never saw anybody pray like her before. Not outside of a church anyways. This was inside of a house. My parents didn't pray in that way. My father definitely not, bless him. And my mother, well, she had some of that as well. But I remember looking at her praying a rosary beads, holding these beads in her hand, and she looked up at me because she noticed me looking at her curiously, and her eyes just stung me. She gave me, she had such intensity in her eyes, it just stung me. That's part of my lineage. That's part of my blood lineage, also my spiritual lineage. But I didn't think much more about my lineage, or even that I come from somewhere, until I started practicing Zen with my teacher in central Pennsylvania at Mount Equity Zendo. I didn't start thinking about lineage and I didn't really take it very seriously at all until I had the practice every day with my teacher for almost 15 years. I mean, we didn't chant the lineage every day, but we chanted the lineage, this thing in Zen. If you stick around long enough, you know that there's a lineage. And we call it a lineage in Zen, that begins with actually we call them the 7 Buddhas before the present Buddha. All right, then there's the Buddha. And then there's the generations up to Bodhidharma, who transmitted Zen to China. And then there's a slew of ancestors that transmitted the Dharma from China through to Japan. And then most Zen temples in the United States and in Japan and elsewhere in the world, in Europe, South America, Central America, they chant a lineage that is based on either Zen Master Do. Well, it starts all the way from what I just mentioned, the 7 Buddhas before Buddha, Bodhidharma, all the way up to Dogen and Keizan, Zen Master Keizan, who is the one credited with writing the Denko Roku, this book of koans about the transmission of light. But the lineage continues after Keizan Jokin, because he had several students, see? And he transmitted the Dharma to them, and they transmitted the Dharma to their students, and so on, up to the present day. And so you have, as a result, many different lineages that all stem back to Zen Master Keizan in Japan. All the lineages today in Soto Zen stem back to Zen Master Keizan. So we chanted those names, and each lineage has its own particular teachers. Some of them, like for example, in my personal lineage that came from my teacher, Diane Banaj, she had her teacher, etc. And some of the teachers in my lineage overlap with the teachers at with Nonin's lineage, the lineage of Nebraska Zen Center. They go all the way up past Keizan Jokin and connect with other teachers, and then it splits off like the last 5 names or so. So the reason I'm mentioning this about lineage, about chanting the lineage, is because when I was doing it, after 3 or 4 years of doing that, it started to hit me like, this is important. There's something important about chanting these names that connects me back to the living Buddha. There's something really important about that. And I feel spiritually nourished and connected just simply by chanting those names. Even if you don't know the stories behind them. I mean, knowing the stories really, it magnifies this connection. It magnifies this connection with the past in such a deep and beautiful way. But even just chanting the names regularly, I felt such a deep devotion welling up in me towards these teachers that managed to transmit the Dharma from one generation to the next for my benefit. And every day doing that. And I started to think about it, and I thought, I don't even know my own blood ancestors this well. And yet I can trace this lineage, this Zen lineage that I'm a part of, all the way back 2,500 years. And it started to make me think. And one day I went, I was visiting my family, my parents, and it's rough trying to share with your family something that you love that they don't understand, right? You know what I'm talking about, right? When you fall in love with the Dharma in this culture, it's very difficult to transmit that beyond those who have already fallen in love with it. It's difficult to transmit it to those, particularly our family members, if they don't understand where you're coming from and if we can't make the connections with them. But I wanted to. We desire, that's what the transmission is. It's transmitting something beyond. It's not about Zen. It's not even about the Dharma. It's transmitting something much deeper, something beyond our comprehension, something that they already know. So I went to see my family, and I had this kind of somewhat brief conversation with my father. And I wanted to, I would have loved to be able to communicate this much more deeply with him. And, now that he's passed away, I feel like he's closer to me now than he has been before. And I feel like he's even with me right now. So I want to, this talk is also, in a sense, for him, and to continue that conversation that I had with him before he died. I asked him at that time, this must have been about 20 years ago now, I said to him, we don't even know our own ancestors, Dad. We don't even know our own ancestors. And to his credit, I have to say, he took my words up as a challenge, and he began to investigate my own ancestors on my father's side. And I learned and then like a few years later, I went to visit again, and I think we were in New Jersey or Pennsylvania somewhere. And he said, let's go on a canoe ride on the river here. And it's where the Pennsylvania, New Jersey borders meet. And so it was nice. We packed a lunch. We went out there. We went out on the boat on it was like a warm warm sunny day. We were sitting out on a boat and on the river eating a lunch, and my father then starts talking to me about all this stuff that he found out about our ancestors that go back to Ireland. It was going back like 7 or 8 generations at least to the original McCabe that came from Ireland and Scotland to Haverstraw, New York, and settled there, and and on all this stuff. And I was really deeply touched, but even more so, I didn't understand what was happening at the time when he was sharing this with me. I almost took it for granted, but when I thought back on it, and even as I think back on it today, I'm just so grateful that he took up that challenge. I hope that I can do that for my son if he gives me a challenge like that when I get older. But in any case, there was something really deep about that, about that. And again, I talk about this to connect us with the importance of lineage and how that helps to break down this sense of anxiety, this all-pervading anxiety that we often fear. And I think it's oftentimes stemming from this sense of disconnection from our roots, from where we come from. And even just to think about it or to chant the names in the case of the Zen lineage can help us to reconnect with lineage and to reconnect with the sense like I come from somewhere, my blood ancestors, my spiritual ancestors, they come from somewhere. All right. And actually, so in the next talk I give, I want to talk a little bit about what it means to have spiritual ancestors. But for this one, just to kind of wrap it up a little bit, except for indigenous people, none of us, unless we have indigenous roots, none of us actually come from where we are presently at. Our roots go back to Europe, they go back to Africa, mine go back to Africa. I found that out through DNA testing. They go back to Asian cultures in this country. Unless, of course, and of course South America, right? Central America. But, here's the thing, in our country, our roots often get erased. They get erased really quickly because of the process of assimilation and how much as our immigrant ancestors wanted to adapt and had to adapt out of necessity, had to adapt. And so that oftentimes the roots, where we come from, got erased. Languages got erased. My mother was the last one who could speak Italian. And, today, she didn't transmit that language to us. It was part of a wider movement by to acculturate. And so, every time we say, check off a box that gives our identity as quote unquote white, we are erasing our heritage, our identity. And I'm not suggesting we don't, if you identify as white, I'm not saying don't identify that way. I'm just saying that when we check off that box, it's as though we're erasing a whole huge chunk of our identity. Our identity is much deeper, much broader than we give credit to often in our life. And so just to start us out on this particular part of this talk, I want to start us out by just having us think a little bit about our lineage. What does that word mean to you? What does lineage mean to you? How far back can you go? How does it make you feel to know that you come from somewhere, just as that leaf knows it comes from that great, majestic tree, right? In a future talk, I'd like to talk a little bit about the ancestral lineage and what that means and how we can divide that lineage into 3 parts, into our blood lineage, our spiritual lineage, and our also non-human lineage. So that will be the next part of this talk. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening.